All right, guys, welcome back. It's not our top 10 this weekend. As tends to happen over the course of international break, a lot of our guys come back from, USMNT break across the Atlantic. They arrive 2, 3 days maybe before the game. Maybe some of them are fatigued, maybe some of them are jet lagged, but usually they either don't necessarily start those games, or if they do, they're not exactly at their peak performance. And so, um, you know, there's no point in trying to do a top 10 if there wasn't enough guys that really deserved it. And I will talk about some of the guys who did deserve to be in the top 10. Ricardo Pepi. But yeah, I'll talk about that before we get into the top 10. But I, first of all, want to talk a little bit about the future. And the reason I want to talk about the future is because there's been a real lack of excitement surrounding this team and surrounding this program basically ever since the 2022 Qatar World Cup. And there's lots of different reasons for that. But this last camp, it's starting to feel like for the first time, people are excited once again about the future and the direction that this team could head in. So I thought it would be good to take a look at not only this generation and how they play under Pochettino, but, potentially what the next generation could look like, or are these guys that could help us even for 2026, some of them. So just wanted to talk about that. But before we keep going, guys, smash the like button if you haven't already. If you're new, welcome to this USMNT channel. Hit subscribe. It's an exciting time to be a fan. The present is looking good. The future is still bright. And I remain cautiously optimistic. Kyle, I get a lot of mixed thoughts on this one. No, love you though. Not that one. Although I love you too, Kyle. This one. Got to get rid of the corny ass intro. So some people really like the intro. Some people really don't like the intro. So it seems like there's not a middle ground. People aren't just like, meh, I could take it or leave it. Either you love it or you hate it. Maybe we'll do a poll sometime and see how people feel about it. Katia Itzel Garcia. Hi, Pete. Not sure who Katia Itzel Garcia is. Is she that hot referee? Is that who she is? Joseph loves the intro. Katia says Pochettino out. Interesting. The camera showed De Jong on every Pepe goal. Joshua Skills, what's your prediction for CNL semi-USA versus Panama? I think we'll win that game. I think Panama is a team that we can, I don't want to say easily overcome, but overcome for sure. So, yeah, I think Canada is going to be the toughest team that we would have to face in the Nations League, which will probably play them in the final. Because I have them beating Mexico in the other semi, and I think it'll end up being a USA Canada final. So Jesse Marsh versus Mauricio Pochettino. So, yeah, guys, like I said, excitement surrounding this team, right? There will be excitement, especially if they keep playing the way they played in this last camp, grinding out the away win and just looking swashbuckling at home against Jamaica, especially in the first half. Still work to do in the second half, and obviously there is still work to do defensively. But overall, I think that camp was the first time that I not only personally started to believe again, started to have hope, but also saw hope emerging in the fan base. And I've been a part of this fan base for a very long time now. And after Copa America, I don't think it had ever been that people hadn't been that depressed about the future of the national team since, I want to say, Cuba. But anyways, it's starting to look up now, and there's even more reason to be excited. I've been working on this video for quite some time now, quite a few months, since the summer, really, and looking at who are the kids that have a really bright future. Because the last under-20 cycle, the one that went to the Under-20 World Cup and ended up, I think, getting to the semifinals in Uruguay. Let's stop and pause and take a look at, that was in 2023. So, of course, it's not like it's set in stone or done or anything. But out of those guys, who has really emerged from that group and, taken a really strong hold with the senior team? Cade Cowell, youth level merchant, right? So he hasn't not. I know he's been called up to a few camps, but he's not a good player, in my opinion. I mean, he's been called up to a few senior team camps. Diego Luna probably deserves a look, is doing pretty good. So with RSL this year and MLS did all right. Maybe get a move. Jack McGlynn doing okay with Philly. There are a few, like what about the defenders? Justin Che, nothing. Brandon Craig, nothing. Jonathan Gomez, now playing in Greece. You know, you look at guys like that, and you're Gabriel Slonina benched at Barnsley. Into midfield, Jack McGlynn was there. Interesting. Diego Luna was there. Somewhat interesting. Quinn Sullivan on the wings. Nobody has really grabbed a senior team spot or really emerged as a potential world-class player or even an elite player. Wiley now getting some minutes in France. Let's kind of see what he looks like. Kevin Paredes, you know, injured again. So there's just that under-20 cycle. And even, you know, Tak and I even said this at the time, there was nobody in that group that you look at and you think there are some high ceiling players in this group. With the under-20s now that were the under-17s, I do see a few high ceiling players. But more importantly, when I look down at the under-17 players, that's when I really start to get excited and see talent that could become something special. And so they are going to be, some of them are going to be included here today with the U20s. But before we get into it, guys, don't forget, Bet Online, where the game starts. Believe is the code. Check it out. Thank you for sponsoring the video. Let's talk quickly about the weekend. Ricardo Pepi, a hat trick in yet another start. Luke de Jong out injured. Watched him score a hat trick. And it's not just that he's scoring a hat trick in this one game. In the two other games that he started for PSV, he had braces in both of those games. In the meantime, Luke de Jong's performances have dropped as he aged. He's still good. He's still very good for PSV. He's just not as good as he was last season. So it looks like we are witnessing a changing of the guard with Ricardo Pepi. He's in form. He's confident. He's playing well. He might not be as well-rounded a player as Luke de Jong is, and may never be that kind of guy, but he's an extremely good finisher, and he still hasn't turned 22 yet. So considering his age, I think it's very impressive what he's doing for PSV, and I personally think it is going to be hard for Luke de Jong to get his spot back if PSV keeps playing like this. If Pepi keeps playing like this for PSV, if he keeps scoring and assisting every game, de Jong's going to come back and he's going to have to be a super sub, or maybe they'll have de Jong play mostly in the Champions League and have him and Pepi alternate games in the Eredivisie. But I do think by the spring, and you can hold me to this, I think by the spring, by March, late March, early April, Pepi will be the undisputed starter for PSV Eindhoven, unless, of course, he's injured. But that is just my prediction. Griffin Yao got a goal today. Paxton Aronson got a goal today. Or not a goal, an assist. It wasn't the most amazing assist in the world, but the story of Paxton Aronson's season is amazing. 4 goals, 2 assists for Utrecht. They're right up there, second in Eredivisie, 5 points behind PSV Eindhoven, but they do have a game in hand. They could be, challenging for that title. I doubt they're going to win it. I think it's PSV's to win, but it's good to see Paxton Aronson doing so well. And if he keeps up at this level, he should absolutely get called in March over some of the guys that we have been calling in. But it is a crowded midfield that Paxton Aronson is going to have to break through. It really is. And so I think he just needs to keep working, keep steadily pushing and improving, and maybe get back to Frankfurt next season if they feel like he's ready for the Bundesliga, and then we'll take it from there. Other than that, Gio Reyna came back. That's noteworthy. Got his 12 minutes, since his injury in 2 months. Didn't do much. Completed 12 out of 12 passes, but in my opinion, could have pushed the game a little bit more. I don't think he was very dynamic, first game back from injury, so I'm not going to hold it against him. But I do think if he wants more time with this team, he's going to have to do more with the minutes that he does get. So let's see what that looks like over the next few weeks leading into that winter break in Germany. Other than that, Richards, Adams started again, played about 63 minutes for Bournemouth. Wasn't great on one of Brighton's goals. They ended up losing that game, was pulled in the 60-something minute, but him being healthy and playing is important. Richards got a few minutes off the bench for Palace. Pulisic was rested for most of the game. Weah came off the bench. They were all fine. Musa, McKennie, Weah, Pulisic were all fine. Balogun's still not quite back from injury yet. We might see him midweek in the Champions League, or we might see him next weekend. We will wait and see what happens. But enough talking about the weekend. Let's talk about the future. Now, a couple of caveats. Trying to predict, make a top 10 of young players is tough because I'm not basing it on where they are at now. I'm basing it on ceiling, like who I think has the highest ceilings in this group. And that can be a very subjective thing. Scouts disagree, general managers disagree, coaches disagree, sporting directors disagree, media members disagree, ex-players, disagree on which players. And then on top of it, there's so many factors that go into whether or not a player ends up reaching their full potential or hitting what we consider, quote, their ceiling, right? From injuries to environment to personal drive and motivation, mentality, coaching, the people that they, end up associating with, the influences in their life, the environments that they're in. Sometimes, obviously, injuries, that can be a big one. Bad luck, like decisions that they make. Sometimes you can, especially with young players, you can see like a player falls in love and takes a year or two off from playing good soccer because they're, young and very obsessed with a girl. And that can definitely, I don't want to say cap their ceiling, but if you lose 1 or 2 years of development because of a lack of mental focus, then that can absolutely, I know some players that have had steep drop-offs in their career, and those steep drop-offs coincided with them getting a girlfriend. Not saying getting a girlfriend is the wrong thing, but obviously, when you're very young, emotions can run away with you very quickly, especially when it involves love and romance and whatnot. But these are the top 10 that I believe have the highest ceiling right now. What I'm going to do is 6 months from now, I'm going to come back and update this list. I'm going to look at where they are at and maybe tweak things. And so we'll see how that goes. Agree, disagree. Nothing is set in stone with young players. Predicting who's going to be a success and at what level for young players is very, very, very difficult. So let's just see where this goes. But girls are evil week 2024. Katya says, no girlfriends allowed. I mean, it is true. We've all been there, right? We all at one time were young and in love and probably either made dumb decisions as a result or focus in other areas of our life was not there. I'm sorry, but everybody who's been in love at a young age, even when you get older, that can still happen when you fall in love. Your focus switches. So, and at, young ages especially, your focus needs to be very, very sharp on your career. Some guys can do it and it's no problem and it doesn't really pull their focus, but not everyone. All right, number 10 is Maximo Carrizo of NYCFC 2. He's a 16-year-old attacking midfielder, played a pretty good season, decent to good season, I would say, for NYCFC 2. 3 goals and 3 assists in MLS Next Pro, which is still an academy league. However much people want to call it a reserve league, there are some teams that bring some reserve players, but largely it is an academy league. He did also score a nice goal in the US Open Cup, which was good to see. He has at times been bullied off the ball and maybe, lacks the physicality to be, because he's a very technical player, but sometimes he lacks the physicality for that technique to be effective. Okay. He's 16 years old. He is almost 17. He's going to be 17 in February. So we'll see what he looks like next season. I wonder if he's going to get some minutes with NYCFC soon. I will be watching his progress. The only reason I don't have him higher on this list is because I think he is going to have to grow a bit more and develop a bit more of a physicality in order to really be effective as a player. The other issue with Maximo Carrizo, and it's not his fault at all, his dad is definitely a character. He is a personality and has said a lot of things and basically for a while was saying, I'm never going to let my kid play for the U.S., and then sort of backtracked later on Twitter and was like, well, actually, I think, what I meant is that's my opinion, but he can make whatever decision he wants. His dad is a little bit of a loudmouth. Not that necessarily impacts his career, but he does need to be careful about, his dad needs to be careful about that. Because whether, the kid he is an Argentine dual nat. Personally, I don't think he's good enough for Argentina. But whoever he ends up wanting to play for, whether it's the U.S. or Argentina, sometimes dynamic parents can be difficult. They really can, and can actually do damage to a child's career. Ahem. Claudio, and Daniel Reina. So that's Maximo Carrizo. I only have him at 10th. I want to see more from him next season. He will be 17 years old. Be interesting to see how much time he spends with NYCFC 1 and NYCFC 2, and whether or not he can be more effective for the MLS Next Pro team, which I would expect him to be at the age of 17. But somebody to watch. Player comparison is Paxton Aronson. He is the player that he most reminds me of. Slight of build, technical little player, but not overly dynamic when it comes to dribbling or doing creative, amazing things with the ball. But again, he's 16. So lots can happen between now and even 4 years from now when he'll still only be 20. Number 9 is Julian Hall of the New York Red Bulls. He is a forward/winger. He's a forward who is very quick, very technical. He can play as a 9. He can also play as a winger. Most of his minutes with New York Red Bulls 2 have come as a winger. This season, he's gotten 2 goals and 1 assist in MLS. Okay, that's playing with the first team. This was a kid who trialed with Dortmund and New York Red Bulls Dortmund and Manchester United before signing with New York Red Bulls. And there was interest, but he chose to start his career with the Red Bulls, which I'm fine with. I personally think Dortmund would have been a better development environment for him. But the kid definitely has a lot of potential, and getting pro minutes at his age is certainly not something to sniff at. He hasn't gotten any playoff minutes yet, which is interesting. Whether or not they're going to rely on him at all during the playoffs, let's wait and see. But next year is where I expect to be sort of a breakout year for Julian Hall. He reminds me the most of Folarin Balogun. Again, this is style of play. This is not necessarily talking about ceiling or he's going to be at that level or is at that level right now. It's more about the style of play because he is a 9 who's very quick and very good dribbling 1v1, very technical, very fluid in his movement and his passing, but explosive in 1v1 situations. And that's why he reminds me of Folarin Balogun, if I had to make a comparison. But a very interesting young player to watch. Has been with the under-20s, will continue to be with the under-20s going forward, and somebody that could be a major contributor at that under-20 World Cup next October. Number 8 is Peyton Miller of the New England Revolution, a 17-year-old left back who has gotten a lot of minutes in MLS this season, albeit for probably the worst team in MLS. 925 minutes and also got 2 assists. Neither of those assists were like a cross or a cutback or something that I would consider necessarily a real creative assist. It was more like he passed it to the guy, a simple, easy sideways pass, and then the guy went and, dribbled down the field and scored. So, don't mistake those 2 assists for production in the final third, if that makes sense. But even to be playing at a pro level at his age, when he was 16 years old, and doing quite okay in MLS at his age is, makes you feel like this kid has a high ceiling. Now, Caleb Wiley also debuted in MLS at age 16. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you are, a super high ceiling player. And maybe, Caleb Wiley will be, but there's been very little progress in the last few years with Caleb Wiley. This Peyton Miller does not, to me, seem like the most technical player in the world. He is very, very explosive out of the blocks. Very explosive, which is why he reminds me a little bit of what's his name? Anthony Robinson, where maybe he isn't the guy that's going to be 1, 2, 3 touch, pow, pow in the build out under pressure. But he is a guy that can be very, very explosive on both sides of the ball and could be a good outlet on the left, potentially as a backup to Anthony Robinson in the future. And on top of that, also potentially his long-term heir if he continues to develop and become the type of player that we think he could be. So I just want to refute this real quick. Peyton Miller is a dual nat, also eligible for Mexico because of a grandparent. This was bait. It was put out on Twitter. It's not true. He isn't eligible for Mexico, so only eligible for the US. Oh, look at this. Late. I like your channel, Pete, but the intro is horrible. Please pay like $25 and get something good. No hard feelings. Like I said, it's a divisive intro. Either you love it or you hate it. Seems like most people love it, but, we'll see what the future looks like if it stays or not. So that is Peyton Miller. I currently have him at number 8. Number 7 is Josh Winder of Benfica B. He is a center back. Was one of the few players in the last Under-20 World Cup that was also eligible for this Under-20 World Cup coming up next year. He has been injured for Benfica B. After that, Under-20 World Cup, that's where he went to Benfica, and then he got injured for a long time, which has stalled his development a little bit. But he's back now. He's playing well. He's got 800 minutes with their B team in, Liga Portugal 2 and scored 3 goals, all of which were headers. The player comparison that I most compare him to is Chris Richards. His recovery speed isn't the quickest. That's the one, I guess, not criticism, but one hesitation I have with him. But on the ball, he is quite good, which technical ball-playing center backs is something that, we need. So let's see what he looks like in the future. It's also possible he could be with Benfica's first team next season, especially if Otamendi leaves. One of their 2 center backs are going to leave. And so if they do, they could possibly promote Josh Winder to the first team. Kevin Sullivan of the Philadelphia Union, 15-year-old midfielder. I have him in number 6 right now. He had 5 goals, 4 assists in MLS Next Pro, as well as 9 MLS minutes. Now, he is far and away the most hyped young American player, and in my opinion, overhyped. Not because he's not a good player, not because he doesn't have very high potential, but because he has become part of the MLS marketing machine, sort of the way they did with Freddie Adu. Now, in my opinion, when Jim Curtin called him the best young player in the world, not only was he wrong, it was an absurd thing to say, because he isn't even the best young American player in the world, much less the best young player in the world. And Manchester City paid $2 million for this kid. Meanwhile, teams are paying 40, 50, 60 million for the next young Brazilian wunderkind. Okay. He's not the best young player in the world, but he is a promising young player, and we need to see how he continues to develop. For a 15-year-old, he is very physically developed, and that has definitely helped his trajectory because he's able to play up to other age groups. He has a very solid technical floor, but I don't ever see him do anything that I consider super special, right? Like when you watch a special player, even when they're young, you see them do things that you go, oh my God, what has he just done, right? I see him do a lot of good basic things very well and score some bangers of goals, but I don't see him take players on. I don't see him be unpredictable. He's got some good set pieces. He's got a wicked left foot. And I'm very curious to see how much he's going to be with the MLS senior team next year with the Union. He's been with the 2 team. We'll see what it looks like next season and how he adapts to MLS. He's definitely a promising player. He reminds me most of Weston McKennie. For the Union too, he was playing as an attacking midfielder, which he can play. In my opinion, might be better as a box-to-box midfielder. But like Weston McKennie, he might not be a purely creative player in the attacking third, but he is a guy who's dynamic on both sides of the ball, can dribble, good passer, can pick a good pass. And more importantly, not that this is important, but what I do like about Kevin is, although he does have a good head on his shoulder, he does seem to have some swagger about him, which sometimes it feels like, some American players are missing that. Even if they're a good player, they might be missing a little bit of that swagger, which can certainly help you as a player, but it can also endear you to the fans, and particularly with Americans. I think we need that arrogance. Pochettino talked about this a bit more with some of our players. We're a little bit too nice and maybe a little too shy. And I don't think anybody encapsulated that better than Christian Pulisic not taking the penalties for Milan because they grabbed the ball away from him, even though it was his job, right? By contrast, 15-year-old Kevin Sullivan had a similar situation with David Vasquez, where Vasquez is the free kick taker, but he wanted the free kick, took the free kick out of David Vasquez's hands, got the assist on the free kick, and then turned around and glared at Vasquez. Now, look, that's his teammate. You could maybe argue that might have been a little over the top, but you know what? Kevin Sullivan is definitely a player with swagger. I'm curious to watch his trajectory. Some people are going to be mad that he's not higher on this list, but for now, I have him at number 6. That could change in 6 months. Let's see what he looks like next season. Number 5 is Pedro Soma. He is the 18-year-old defensive midfielder, now with Barcelona, formerly of Cornellà, is I believe how you pronounce it. 189 minutes so far with Barca's U19 team since he joined in the summer. 225 minutes in the UEFA Youth League, and has been, from what I have seen clips of his game, not full games, so I don't want to sound like I know, but from what I've seen, he's fitted in quite nicely at Barcelona. He is one of the guys who most impressed when he was with the U17. That U17 team was rough, and I think it's bled a little bit in the U20s. You don't see a lot of amazing high ceiling players, particularly not like that under-17 World Cup. Don't see a ton of them. But he was one of the ones that always impressed me and continues to impress me with the U20s. I don't know if he's ever going to be a Barcelona level player, but there's no reason to believe he couldn't play at least in La Liga one day. What kind of player is he? For me, he is the hybrid of Tyler Adams and Johnny Cardoso, because he can play defensively. He's very good protecting that back line, winning duels, winning tackles. He's a physical presence in midfield, likes to bully players, likes to win balls. But when he gets on the ball, unlike Tyler Adams, that's when he becomes more of a Johnny. Very silky smooth, good passer, good vision, intelligent decision-making. If he develops into what I think Pedro Soma could be, he will be the starting 6 after 2026 for God knows how long. And that is a big, big if, right? We don't know if he's going to develop into that. We'll wait and see. But at the very least, he will be, I think, a part of the USMNT for years to come, provided he doesn't have any major injuries or any of the things that I mentioned that can derail a young player's career. But Pedro Soma, definitely one to watch. I can't wait to see him in the Under-20 World Cup next year, because I think he's going to be one of our best players. Cole Campbell, a lot of noise about Cole Campbell recently. He makes it at number 4, has made his Dortmund debut this season, mostly due to injuries. That Dortmund's shocker. Dortmund having injuries is sort of like a duh at this point, because we know how bad they are with injuries. He is a winger, 18 years old, chose us about a year and a half ago. Aron Johansson, by the way, was crucial in helping to pick the United States. He's played 74 minutes for Dortmund's senior team, had 1 goal, 2 assists for Dortmund's under-19s, and 1 goal with their under-23 team in Liga 3. Now, the reason those numbers are so low is because for most of the season, he has been with the senior team on the bench. So I think those numbers would be higher if he was actually playing. And now that, Reyna's back, Bino Gittins is back, Adeyemi's back, Haller, all the injuries that are coming back now, I think he's going to go back to the under-23 team for a bit, at least until the break. But we'll see. You never know. He didn't do anything glorious in the minutes that he got for Dortmund, but at the same time, he looked like he fit in, right? He didn't look out of place playing for the senior team. And so that is where I think it'll be interesting to watch his trajectory. He was on the bench this weekend for Dortmund, but he did not get off the bench. Gio Reyna did instead, which is fair and fine. I want to see him ball out with the under-23s, and then maybe after the winter break, come back in January, February with the senior team if they need it. He scored today with the under-23s. Well, there you go. So he scored today with the under-23s, says Albert. Yesterday, he did not score. I mean, he was on the bench for the senior team and now back with the under-23s, which is probably, he's in that in-between place right now where he's not quite a first-team player yet. Might be just too good for the under-23s. But I think his next goal or his next objective should be to be a full-time senior team player when we come back from break. So when we come back from the winter break, he should be a full-time senior team player. That's my goal for Cole Campbell. And I think if he does, then he should be with the senior team in the March Nations League games, because we are thin at winger depth. We're thin in quality. We have depth, but not a ton of quality. So kudos to Cole Campbell. He is a bright player. Reminds me of Tim Weah because he is very explosive, very fast out of the block. Sometimes not always as tricky. Like, he's explosive and quick, and he's good with the ball at his feet, but he's very rarely going to trick you into something. I like Cole Campbell a lot. I think there's a future there. Tim Weah, it's not the perfect comparison, but I do think Tim Weah is probably the closest thing in our pool that you could compare him to. He might be better than Tim Weah at some point. Like, he might have a higher ceiling than Tim Weah, but time will tell. Young players, hard to tell this early. Number 3 is Noah Kai Banks at Augsburg, a 17-year-old center back. And every time I watch this guy play, whether it's with the U19s or clips of him with the the US U20s or Augsburg U19s, he is an absolute baller. Tall, fast, very physical, good with the ball at his feet. Decision-making still needs some work, and that's okay. I expect a 17-year-old center back to need decision-making, especially in a position that is so much based on experience and knowledge of the game. He did make Augsburg's bench a few times so far this season, mostly because of injuries, but he's got logged 800 minutes with their under-19 team. I think he is the center back in our youth pool that I am most excited about, because he seems to be the full package in terms of, we have some guys that are good on the ball, but not super quick, right? Or maybe not super tall. We have some guys that are tall and quick, terrible on the ball. It's hard to have all of those in one. I think the closest things that we have to all in one is Chris Richards, but Chris Richards' USMNT form has not been the same as his Crystal Palace form. Noah Kai Banks seems like he could have it all. I would call this kid up in January personally, and ask Augsburg if we can bring him to January camp and give him minutes in Camp Cupcake, because I think Camp Cupcake should be for players like this rather than just handing out more minutes to some MLS lifers as part of this completely unnecessary January MLS promotion tour, which is what it has become. But really, it should be a camp to get guys like Diego Cochin, for example, starting in goal, guys like Noah Kai Banks, guys like that, maybe even Cole Campbell. If Cole Campbell is still with the under-23s, ask them, can we bring him to this camp, right? So let's see what Pochettino does with that camp. How interested anyone's going to be in that camp and how much anybody's going to care is going to depend very much on who Pochettino calls up. If it turns out to be another MLS lifer snooze fest, no one's going to care about that camp. So that is Noah Kai Banks. And then number 2 on this list, a kid who doesn't get as much promotion or hype as Kevin Sullivan, mostly because he's not part of MLS and the MLS promotion marketing machine is strong. But Mattis Albert, formerly of the LA Galaxy, was with their MLS Next Pro team, looking very good. This summer was signed by Borussia Dortmund. And I want to be careful how I say this, because I know this is going to get misinterpreted and misquoted in the future. So let me be very clear. Right now, Mattis Albert is on the same trajectory as Christian Pulisic and Giovanni Reina were when they went to Dortmund. And by that, what do I mean? What I mean is, when both Pulisic and Gio went to Dortmund, they were both put with the under-17s first. Within a few months, both of them graduated from the other under-17s. Gio was 16, Pulisic was 16. Okay? Mattis went there at 15, and he just turned 15 in May. So, about 6 months ago. He is 15 years old. He scored 3 goals for the under-17s in 4 games, and they promoted him to the under-19 team. He is continuing to produce for the under-19 team and even scored a goal in the UEFA Youth League, which is 18, 19, 20-year-olds from all around Europe. Okay? usually the best 18, 19, 20-year-olds that are not with their first teams. I really like this kid. He is everything that you want out of an explosive winger, because he's not only explosive, he's tricky, he's technical, he's extremely hard to mark, very fast. He reads the game very well. He's an excellent finisher. He's strong. He's good in the air. He has everything. And I hope I'm not going over the board by saying he could be another Christian Pulisic. I say could. I did not say will, because you just don't know. But the trajectory he's on right now, he's actually slightly ahead of both Gio Reyna and Christian Pulisic when they were at Dortmund, as in terms of trajectory, because both of them went there at 16, and then they were there for a few months with the U17s, and then later promoted to the U19s. Gio Reyna played a few games at the U23s before he debuted in that COVID season in 2020. So both Pulisic and Gio Reyna debuted for Dortmund at age 17. Mattis Albert, it is not unrealistic for him to be to make his debut for Dortmund next season, when he will be only 16 years old. So I'm very hyped on Mattis Albert. He's still a kid. He's 15 years old. I don't want to overhype him. But to me, he is not getting as much love or hype as a guy like Kevin Sullivan. But to me, this is a better prospect and somebody that I have a lot more faith in long term. Hopefully, they both develop and hit their ceilings, because the more the merrier for all of us. Last but not least, and frankly, this really shouldn't be a debate, is Diego Coaching. A goalkeeper for Barcelona. Most of you know him by now. Was injured. He did get called up to that first camp in when Mikey Varas was in charge, which, by the way, was still a Pochettino roster from what I heard. And then he was injured for that October camp, and then came back for the November camp in the roster, albeit as the fourth goalkeeper, but the only guy in this entire group to be called up to the senior team without having played a single first team minute. And they are very, very, very high on him over at Barcelona for obvious reasons. He's played 5 games for Barcelona B instead of being the third string for the first team, which is good. He needs games, he needs minutes, he needs reps, he needs to continue to develop. But this is the guy that could be our starting goalkeeper for 15 to 20 years. 20 seems like, 20 is not that long, because he's only 18 years old now, right? 20 years from now, he'll be 38. So I really like Diego Coaching. He is, as you can see, there's no comparison. We have never had a goalkeeper like Diego Coaching. We've had great shot stoppers. We've never had a goalkeeper who can play with their feet the way that Diego Coaching can. No American goalkeeper has ever played like him, ever, in terms of profile. Doesn't mean he's going to necessarily be a success. Goalkeepers develop late. He's very young. Lots can happen. We shouldn't overhype Diego Coaching, but Pochettino is very high on him for obvious reasons, and so is everybody at Barcelona. I think Diego Coaching will be our number 3 goalkeeper at the 2026 World Cup. He's already with the roster, and I think one of two things will happen. Either next season he will be the backup goalkeeper at Barcelona, or they'll send him out on loan. I don't know if another year in the B team is necessarily going to be on the cards for him. So let's wait and see what happens. But Coaching is obviously number 1. Then I have some honorable mentions. These are guys that I don't have in my top 10 yet, but they could move into the top 10 in the future, right? Maybe 6 months from now when I redo this video. Reed Baker-Whitting, fullback for Seattle Sounders, who can also play in midfield, played quite well last night against LAFC. Mattia Kimbani, a center back for DC United, who's made multiple MLS appearances. Still very young, isn't in the best development environment right now. There's been rumors about him leaving in January, going to Europe. We'll see where he ends up. Ben Kremaski is a guy who's had a lot of hype, mostly because he plays with Messi and because he's an Argentine dual nat that made it to like one Argentina camp. Javier Mascherano is like, look, bud, like he literally told him to go play for the U.S. He was like, look, I mean, I'll be honest with you. He didn't say this, but I imagine this is how the conversation went. I got 20 Ben Kremaskis right here in Argentina. Like, your best bet is to go play with the U.S. And he's 19 years old. I don't really see the hype. Some people really hype Ben Kremaski because he is getting pro minutes in MLS, which is good. But in terms of long-term potential for him, I don't really see a profile that I'm like, yeah, this guy's going to be a high-level baller one day. Gavin Beavers is a very interesting player, has gotten quite a few minutes as the starting keeper for RSL this season. Not always the starting keeper, but he's played at least 10, 15 games. Not great with his feet also. He has the same problem as most American goalkeepers, but seems to be a very interesting shot stopper. Has a good frame, very quick reflexes, confident, has a lot of assets that you want in a young goalkeeper. Nico Shakiris, I was very high on him 2 years ago, where he made his debut in MLS and looked very, very good. And then he had 2 injuries, one to start the 2023 season and one to start the 2024 season. He came back from both of those injuries a very different player. He looked overweight, he looked heavy, he looked awkward and slow, and I don't exactly know what happened during those injury time if he didn't look after himself, but he did not look like the same player at all. We're starting now to see the guy that I liked before, okay? It's starting to come back. It feels like maybe he's getting back to the level that I saw him play at before, because he can be a very interesting, creative, attacking midfielder. He's the son of Sean Sekiris, who's one of the youth coaches. The downside with Sekiris is he's at a club that has no idea what they're doing with youth development. They have a lot of interesting prospects, including a guy like Cruz Medina. They've never been very good at developing and turning prospects into real solid players at a high level. So that might be the one mark against him. Nelson Pierre, or Neil Pierre, is a center back who played all year for Philly 2. I saw a lot of him because I watched a lot of Philly 2 to track Kevin Sullivan. Neil Pierre is a lot like Noah Kai Banks. Tall, fast player. Very long strides when he runs. Good in the air. Fantastic on the ball. Massive frame. Again, just has all the tools that you want in a high-level center back. He does not have a homegrown deal with Philadelphia Union yet. I don't know if he's going to sign one this coming season or if he's going to go abroad. But it'll be interesting to see what Philly do, because they fired Jim Curtin. And one of the reasons they fired Curtin is because they didn't feel like he was bringing through enough of the young players. A guy like CJ Oni, for example, should probably have been getting more minutes with the Philadelphia Union. But Neil Pierre was maybe holding off on signing a homegrown contract until he was going to get minutes. And maybe the new coach is like, I'm going to be integrating more young players. Or maybe Neil Pierre saw what happened to Brandon Craig and was like, I don't want to be sent out to USL. So I'm not against him signing a homegrown with Philly, but only if they're actually going to use him in the first team, because I think he's already outgrown MLS Next Pro. He was one of the best defenders with MLS Next Pro. He really was. In fact, I'm just going to say he was the best defender. And if you watch that performance against FC Dallas in the final, who, by the way, FC Dallas brought a bunch of guys in their 20s to play in this against teenagers. And they ended up losing 3-2 because Dallas was not interested in development. They wanted to win the trophy. But that was a Philly team full of young teenagers, and they absolutely balled out. They were playing them off the park for the first half at least. And then I think, things turned around. They got a red card. It wasn't looking great. Marshall saying that Pierre was at Mönchengladbach today. I did not know that. That's very interesting. So there's a chance he might be signing with Gladbach in January. He isn't 18 yet, though, so I don't know if he can sign with a European team, because I don't believe he has any European passport. So might be something to keep an eye on. But Neil Pierre is a underrated Noah Kai Banks that I just think hasn't been talked about enough. I think he's going to be a very, very good player. I really do. So these are the honorable mentions to keep track of. There are a few other guys. Grayson DeToni. I didn't really talk about guys that are playing for another country right now. For example, Christian McFarlane is chosen to play for England right now, or he might have been somewhere in this list. If they're playing for somebody else, I don't really have them in the future right now on this list. It doesn't mean they can't be with us in the future. It's just then you have to start looking at every eligible dual nat, whether they want to play for us or not. Jesus Galvan says, any expectations for the Under-20 World Cup in 2025? It depends on who gets released, right? So a year from now, Cole Campbell might be with Dortmund full-time and they're not going to release him, right? That's an unfortunate part of having really good young players, is they end up graduating to their respective senior teams early. And that that creates a problem. They don't want to release them for the Under-20 World Cup. Julian Hall might be, playing full-time in MLS, probably will be full-time in MLS next year, may not get released for the Under-20 World Cup, especially because it coincides with the playoffs. Philly, very likely to release their guys. They always do. But there are guys who may not get released. Noah Kai Banks could be with Augsburg's first team next season, and so they may not want to release him, right? So it just depends. Peyton Miller, are New England Revolution going to release him? There's so many factors. Mattis Albert. What if Mattis Albert is with Dortmund's first team next season, right? Like there's so many factors, but if everybody gets released and everybody is healthy, there is a possibility that we could have this starting lineup at the Under-20 World Cup. Diego Cochin in goal, a back four of Reed Baker-Whiting, right back, Peyton Miller at left back, who, by the way, I rate a lot higher than Nolan Norris, the current starting left back. They're playing Peyton Miller as a winger with the Under-20s. I don't think he's a winger. I know he played as a winger in his youth days with New England, but I think he projects much higher as a left back. And then you get a center back pairing of maybe Noah Kai Banks and Josh Winder. Okay. And then you could have a very interesting midfield of Kevin Sullivan, Nico Shakirias, or Ben Kremaski, and then Pedro Soma at the 6. And then on the wings, you could have Cole Campbell and Mattis Albert and Julian Hall up top. If we have that starting lineup a year from now, that could be a contender to win the whole thing. Like that is a very, very good starting lineup. So I don't want to say there are any expectations right now, but these players, if they develop, they'll be with their first teams and may not get released. And that's what happened last time. It's happened with every Under-20 World Cup, if you guys remember, right? Lots of guys. Weston McKennie didn't get released for the 2019 Under-20 World Cup. In this last Under-20 World Cup, there were tons of guys who didn't get released. So hard to say. Jalen Neal, for example, didn't get released in this last Under-20 World Cup. Neither did Brian Gutierrez. Jonathan Gomez is in Greece, Gabriel Fernandez. He's playing-ish in Greece right now. A couple of super chats here, and then we'll end it. Albert says, hey, Pete, I don't know if you'll talk about him, but thoughts about Mize or the goalkeepers in Roma and Lens. So, Albert, I know Mize. Jack Mize is another good young player. He's still with Dortmund's under-17s. Going to have to try and track him and see what he does. He's not in my top 10 right now. He also was with the Red Bulls. Someone to keep an eye on, for sure. I don't know who you're talking about with the Roma and Lens goalkeepers. So that might be my lack of knowledge. Not saying they're not good. Reed Baker-Whiting played yesterday for the Sounders versus LAFC. What do you think? Cherundolo should not coach USMNT. Yes, agreed. Yeah, I mean, I think Reed Baker-Whiting is a solid pro right now. I don't think he has a high ceiling as some of these guys do, but certainly to be playing as much as he has, is certainly a good sign. And I think he's got a good floor. I'm just not as high on his ceiling as some people are. Chris Marquand, Adrian Gilnoy's sadly been injured for a very long time and needs to get over those injuries. He also didn't show much in that under-17 group when he played with us. So was very highly rated because of his Barcelona Academy pedigree, but needs to show more on the field for both club and country. And first of all, needs to get healthy. I want to say this loud and clear. I am 100% sure this is not true. So any idea if the tweet from USMNT report on Peyton Miller European interest is credible or not? I talked to a few people. I don't believe it is true. I don't believe it is true that he is eligible for Mexico. And even if he was, I can tell you 100% Peyton Miller ain't representing Mexico. Okay. Just because he has a grandmother that represents Mexico, he wants to play for the United States, has been with the U.S. youth teams. I'm pretty sure that's a fake report. I think it was put out to troll El Tri fans because El Tri fans jump on every single report like that. That's what I have heard. Are you confident Albert will play for the U.S.? I would say I am 90% confident unless we start treating him poorly. The reason that Michael was asking this is because he is both eligible for Germany and France, and both Germany and France have already been sniffing around him. Guys, we cannot lose Mattis Albert. Mattis Albert is a very high ceiling player. He continues to play really well for Dortmund. He was born and raised in the United States. He, just left to go to Germany. I think he probably would rather play for the U.S. So long as he's there with our under-17s. And I think if he keeps playing like he is, he will be with our under-20s. In February, by the way, are the under-17 CONCACAF qualifiers for the under-17 World Cup. So we could get to see a lot of these kids playing for the U-17s, Kevin Sullivan and Mattis Albert specifically. But yes, I am confident that he will, but of course nothing is set in stone. Things change, people change their mind, circumstances change. I do think we're going to have to promote him sooner rather than later to the U-20s if he keeps playing the way that he is. Great video, Pete. Thank you, Rocco. And Albert says, Pete, I tagged you on Twitter for Cole's goal. All right, I will have a look at it. Guys, I've gone over my time pretty significantly here. Thanks for watching. I'm not very high on Jonathan Tompkinson, for anybody asking. He's also not an under-20 player. So I don't particularly, Juvenal Salazar. He's not an under-20 player, and I don't think he's a very good player, to be honest. Why did we lose Obed Vargas to Mexico and Esmir to Bosnia? Both of them wanted to play for Mexico and Bosnia, respectively, regardless of what the U.S. did. Obed Vargas was going to pick Mexico even if we had brought him to the Olympics. And same for Baraktarevic. A lot of Bosnian influence in his family. He always wanted to play for Bosnia. We could have brought him to the Olympics, but it probably wouldn't have done anything, and he would have switched afterwards. That's what I've heard. Thanks for watching, guys. Smash the like button before you go. Thanks for all the super chats. Patreons. Even though there's no top 10, I will do the highlights from this weekend, the Pepe hat trick, the Paxton Aronson assist, and the Griffin Yao goal for everybody's benefit. So that will be on Patreon tomorrow. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great rest of your weekend. Talk to y'all soon.